He said it quietly.
Stay awake.
Just make it quick. No one in that hospital room could have guessed what would happen next, when a single father took off his jacket and revealed a truth that would change a billionaire's life forever. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The rain came down over Boston like a long sigh from the heavens. By the time Grace Monroe left the glass tower of Monroe Innovations, the streets of the financial district shimmered with reflections of red tail lights and umbrellas turned inside out. It was nearly 11:30 p.m., and the world outside felt blurred like the life she'd built around deadlines, numbers, and empty penthouse rooms. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, steady and hollow, the rhythm of a woman who had learned to walk through storms without slowing down. The doorman had offered to call her a driver, but she had waved him off. She preferred silence, even if it came with rain. Sliding into her black sedan, she exhaled one of those tired, careful exhales that belong to people who no longer remember when they last breathed freely. Inside the car, the soft hum of classical music filled the emptiness. Bach, always Bach. The familiar order of the notes made her believe for a second that life could still make sense. But as she drove through Commonwealth Avenue, she saw her reflection in the window. Perfect hair, perfect lipstick, perfect armor, and wondered when she had become this stranger staring back. Outside, the rain kept falling harder, blurring the lamps of Beacon Street into ribbons of gold. Grace remembered Toledo, the town where she'd grown up, her mother baking bread on Sunday mornings, the smell of warmth and safety. She hadn't smelled that in years. The thought flickered and was gone when the radio interrupted the concerto for a weather alert. Flooding expected near Charles River Parkway. She turned the volume down. She didn't want warnings. She wanted quiet. The tires hissed as she turned toward Storrow Drive, where the Charles River curved like a sleeping serpent. The wipers struggled, their tempo out of sync with the storm. Grace's phone vibrated on the seat. Another message from her assistant. Investors want updates first thing tomorrow. She didn't look. Instead, she whispered under her breath, "Tomorrow?" as if saying the word might conjure one. The flash came too fast, a truck braking, tires screaming against slick asphalt. A blinding glare filled her windshield. The impact was sharp and merciless. Metal shrieked, glass exploded, and everything that was Grace Monroe scattered into noise and darkness. When sound returned, it came with the hiss of rain entering through the broken window and the steady drip of something wet onto her lap. Her head ached. Her chest was pinned by the seatbelt, breath short and uneven. She tried to move her leg, nothing. The smell of gasoline made her throat tighten. She reached for the door handle. It didn't budge. Panic rose like water in her lungs. Outside, through the fractured windshield, headlights shimmered across puddles. A shadow moved someone running toward her car. Grace's first thought was police, maybe a paramedic. The shadow wore a dark jacket, soaked through, and a cap pulled low. "Can you hear me?" The voice was deep, steady, cutting through the chaos like a hand through smoke. Grace barely managed to nod. "Please, just do it quickly," she whispered, her voice thin, almost childlike. "I don't want to feel it." The man leaned closer, rain dripping from his brow. "You're going to be fine," he said calmly. "Name's Eli Turner. I work over at Mass General Hospital. Just stay with me, all right?" His tone was practiced but warm, the kind that came from someone who'd seen fear too many times to let it take control. From his wrist, a tattoo peeked beneath the sleeve, a date, a number, and the faint cross of the Army Medical Corps. Grace tried to focus on his face, but the world kept slipping. The belt wouldn't release. She felt her breath shorten. "Gasoline," she murmured. "It's leaking." "I know," Eli replied. "We've got to move fast." He pulled a small folding knife from his pocket, cut the seatbelt in one motion, and pressed 2 fingers gently to her neck. "Pulse is strong," he muttered, half to himself. The scent of cheap soap and rain clung to him. Then he shrugged off his blue security jacket and draped it over her shoulders, shielding her from the cold night air. "Don't look around. Just look at me," he said softly. "You're still here, Grace. Breathe with me. 1, 2, 1, 2. Her lips trembled. "How do you know my name?" "You left your badge on the passenger seat," he answered, half smiling, voice steady even as thunder cracked overhead. He braced his shoulder against the mangled door. The metal groaned, then gave way with a screech. In one swift movement, Eli freed her from the wreck and lifted her out into the rain. The world outside was chaos, sirens in the distance, red lights flickering across the river. Grace's body shivered uncontrollably. "You're not dying tonight," Eli whispered close to her ear as he laid her down on the damp asphalt. "You're going to see the morning." Rain still poured, as if the city itself were mourning. Eli knelt beside her, his jacket drenched, his breath steady despite the cold slicing through the air. The distant echo of sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue in the puddles around them. Grace blinked through the blur. The man's face came into focus, lined but kind, eyes the color of slate and steady as stone. He spoke again, his voice low and certain. "Stay with me. Don't close your eyes yet." She tried to smile, but her lips wouldn't obey. "You're bossy," she whispered. He gave a short laugh. "You'll thank me later." When the paramedics arrived, Eli stepped back, letting them work. Grace felt the hands, the straps, the stretcher. But her eyes stayed fixed on him, the stranger with the calm voice and the blue jacket now lying forgotten on the ground. As they lifted her into the ambulance, she caught the faint reflection of him through the open doors, standing in the rain, arms crossed, watching until the lights disappeared down the road. Inside the ambulance, everything smelled of disinfectant and adrenaline. The medic pressed an oxygen mask over her mouth. "Ma'am, can you tell us your name?" She tried to answer, but the sound dissolved into the siren's cry. Through the haze of pain and flashing lights, one thought repeated itself. He said I'd see the morning. When she woke again, it was morning. Pale light filtered through the hospital blinds. The rhythmic beeping of a monitor ticked beside her, like a small heartbeat reminding her she was still here. Her arm was bandaged, her leg in a brace. She felt every ache, every bruise, but mostly, she felt the unfamiliar weight of gratitude. For a long time, Grace just listened to the hospital sounds. Distant footsteps, the roll of a meal cart, the low hum of an air vent. It felt almost peaceful, until the door creaked open. A nurse with silver hair peeked in. "Morning, sweetheart. You gave everyone quite a scare." Grace managed a weak smile. "Guess I did." "They said you're lucky," the nurse added, adjusting her foreline. "That night guard who pulled you out. Lord, he's got the heart of a soldier." Barely said a word before disappearing. Grace frowned. "He works here? Mass General. Name's Eli Turner, I think. Quiet man. You'll know him if you see him. Always wears that old blue jacket." The name stayed in her chest like a pulse. Eli Turner. When the nurse left, Grace turned her head toward the window. Outside, Boston was bathed in soft morning fog. Commuters rushed across the street with coffee cups, scarves trailing in the breeze. Life went on, unaware that hers had stopped and restarted in one night. Her assistant had texted dozens of unread messages about investors, reports, meetings. She placed the phone face down. For once, it could all wait. On the chair beside her bed hung the jacket blue, worn, smelling faintly of rain and soap. She didn't remember anyone bringing it in, yet there it was, folded carefully like a quiet reminder. Grace reached out, fingers brushing the fabric. The touch felt almost human, alive. She closed her eyes and saw the flash of headlights, the rain, the stranger's voice saying, "You're not dying tonight." And then, like the first note of a song she hadn't heard in years, something broke open inside her, something softer than fear and heavier than pride. For the first time in decades, Grace Monroe felt small, human, and deeply alive. Outside her window, a church bell rang in the distance. Slow, patient, forgiving. The morning had finally come. Morning sunlight slipped gently through the blinds of room 412 at Massachusetts General Hospital. Outside, Boston was waking up, horns echoing on Cambridge Street, the smell of coffee drifting from a corner cafe, the faint ring of a church bell marking the start of another ordinary day. But for Grace Monroe, nothing about this morning felt ordinary. She sat upright in the hospital bed, her leg propped on a pillow, eyes fixed on the jacket folded neatly on the chair beside her. The blue fabric was still slightly damp, as if holding on to the night that had almost taken her life. Every thread seemed to whisper the same quiet truth. Someone stayed when the world could have walked away. The door opened with a soft creak. A nurse stepped in, kind eyes, silver hair pulled into a bun. The kind of woman who had probably seen more births, recoveries, and goodbyes than anyone should. Her name tag read Martha Doyle. "Well, look who's up," she said, her voice carrying that friendly Boston warmth. "You gave us a scare, honey. How's that leg treating you?" Grace smiled faintly. "It's attached. That's something," Martha chuckled. "That's the spirit." She adjusted Grace's foredrip and glanced toward the chair. "He left that jacket for you, you know. Said you were shaking in the cold and wouldn't stop saying thank you." Grace's eyes softened. "He didn't stay?" "Oh, he never does," Martha replied, shaking her head with affection. "That man works nights here. Doesn't talk much, but when he does, people listen. Name's Eli Turner. You'll see him walking the halls, always early, always tired, always kind." The nurse finished her checkup and left the room smelling faintly of lavender and antiseptic. Grace was alone, again alone, but not quite lonely this time. Her eyes drifted to the jacket once more. There was something deeply grounding about it, as if it belonged to a life far simpler and more honest than hers. Later that afternoon, a doctor came in, discharged a few forms, and said she could leave within a day or two. Her assistant had already called twice, asking when she could return to work. She hadn't answered. Her thoughts were elsewhere on the man who had risked himself to pull her out of the rain. As the hours passed, Grace found herself wondering what kind of person he was. Was he married? Did he have children? Why was someone like him working the graveyard shift? The questions echoed in her mind, softer each time, like a lullaby made of curiosity and guilt. When evening came, the city lights outside turned the window into a mirror. In it, she didn't see the powerful CEO of Monroe Innovations. She saw a woman wrapped in someone else's jacket, trying to remember what it felt like to be cared for. A knock came at the door. "Come in," she said, setting the jacket aside. The door opened slowly, and a man stepped in, carrying a maintenance clipboard. He wore a different jacket this time, navy blue, with the hospital's emblem embroidered on the chest. He paused at the threshold, surprised. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Grace's breath caught. She knew that voice. "You're Eli," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. "That's right, ma'am. I just came to check the thermostat, they said. The heat's been acting up again." "You saved my life?" she said simply. Eli shrugged, his eyes lowering. "You would have done the same." Grace smiled faintly. "I'm not so sure about that." He moved to the wall, adjusting the control panel, pretending not to notice her gaze. He wasn't tall, but there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, a steadiness that felt almost out of time. His hands were calloused, his posture straight, his words measured and polite. "Do you always work nights?" she asked. "Mostly. Someone's got to keep the lights on while everyone's asleep." She wanted to say more to ask why a man who spoke with such quiet dignity seemed to hide from daylight, but the words stayed behind her lips. He finished with the thermostat, gave a small nod, and turned toward the door. "Wait," Grace said quickly. "I didn't thank you properly." "You don't have to." He smiled for the first time, just a small curve of his lips, but enough to soften his entire face. "You already paid me." Her brow furrowed. "How?" He pointed gently toward the window, where the sunrise painted the Charles River gold. "You're alive." Eli turned to leave, but Grace's voice stopped him halfway to the door. "You could have walked away that night," she said. "Why didn't you?" He paused. The silence stretched long enough for her to hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Because somebody once pulled me out of a burning Humvee when they didn't have to," he said quietly. "I figured it was my turn." Then, without waiting for a response, he nodded politely and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him, soft but final. Grace sat there, her heart heavy with something she couldn't name. She wanted to call after him, to say thank you again, to ask about the scars behind his calm voice, but all she could do was stare at the door. The echo of his words filled the room like a hymn. When Martha returned with evening medication, Grace was still holding the jacket in her lap. "You saw him, didn't you?" Martha asked, smiling knowingly. Grace nodded. "He said he works nights. I think he likes being invisible." "And Stowe." "That's Eli," Martha replied, placing the cup of water on the tray. "Lost his wife a few years back. Single father now. His little girl draws pictures for the nurses every Friday. Sweet thing, always smiling. He keeps to himself. but there's not a soul here who doesn't trust that man. Grace looked down at the jacket, her fingers tracing the worn stitching on the cuff. "He said someone once saved him," she murmured. Martha's eyes softened. "And now he saves others." Life has a funny way of circling back like that. She patted Grace's hand gently. "Rest now, honey. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't the pain, it's learning to let someone help you." When the nurse left, Grace switched off the light. The city outside glowed through the blinds in slivers of amber. She could hear the faint rhythm of Boston, the shuffle of nurses' shoes, the distant rumble of the subway, a siren crying somewhere far away. For the first time in years, those sounds didn't make her feel alone. She leaned back, clutching the blue jacket close to her chest. It smelled faintly of rain and soap, and something else, something like decency or courage. As the hours passed, she thought of Eli's words, "You're alive." Simple, almost plain, but they carried a weight. No title, no company report, no $1 million deal ever had. She closed her eyes and breathed it in the air. The light, the fragile promise of another day. Morning came again, gentle and gray. Grace woke before the nurses made their rounds. The jacket was still there, draped over the chair like a quiet witness. She smiled to herself, not because she understood everything, but because, for once, she didn't need to. By the time she was discharged that afternoon, the sky had cleared. A breeze carried the smell of roasted coffee from the shop across the street. Martha hugged her goodbye and said, "Don't be a stranger, Miss Monroe, and maybe say a thank you in person someday." Grace stepped outside into the sunlight, holding the folded jacket against her chest. The city seemed different, gentler, somehow. The reflections on the windows of parked cars looked less like shields and more like mirrors. A taxi pulled up. The driver leaned out. "You headed home, ma'am?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, home." As the cab merged into traffic along the Charles River, she looked out at the water glittering under the late afternoon Sunday. Somewhere across town, a man was probably starting another long night shift, fixing things, keeping the lights on, never asking for thanks. Grace pressed her palm against the jacket on her lap and whispered, almost to herself, "You're right, Eli. I'm alive." Outside, a church bell tolled softly, and the city carried on unaware that, in one quiet hospital room and one borrowed jacket, a woman had begun to remember what it meant to feel human again. A soft drizzle hung over Boston that Saturday morning, the kind of rain that never quite falls but lingers like a memory that refuses to leave. Grace Monroe sat by the tall windows of her penthouse, watching the mist roll across the Charles River. The city below was alive with umbrellas, coffee carts, and the smell of wet pavement. Yet somehow, everything felt quieter than before. She had been home for 2 days, but the silence inside her apartment was deafening. No ringing phones, no assistants rushing in with schedules, no board members to impress. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of rain against glass. On the armchair beside her, the blue jacket lay folded neatly out of place in this world of marble and glass. It didn't belong here, and maybe that was why she kept it. She traced her fingers over its worn fabric, remembering the voice that had told her to breathe, the steady calm that had cut through the storm. Since that night, Eli Turner had never called, never visited, never asked for thanks. He had vanished back into the folds of ordinary life, leaving her with a feeling she couldn't quite name. Down in Dorchester, the morning looked very different. Eli Turner stood at his kitchen counter, pouring cereal into 2 mismatched bowls. His daughter Lily sat at the table swinging her legs, a pencil tucked behind one ear, and her coloring book spread wide open. "Daddy," she said between spoonfuls of milk, "you forgot the toast again." He smiled faintly. "Guess I did." "Mom used to make it first," Lily said softly, still focused on her drawing. Eli's hand paused over the coffee pot. "Yeah," he murmured. "She did. M2. The air grew still for a moment, filled only by the clink of a spoon and the steady drip of the old coffee maker. On the fridge, a dozen of Lily's drawings fluttered angels, firefighters, and one picture of a man pulling someone out of the rain. Underneath it, she had written in uneven letters, "My dad is a hero." After breakfast, Eli put on his work jacket, the one with the hospital emblem stitched on the sleeve, and helped Lily with her coat. The two of them stepped outside, greeted by the scent of wet concrete, and blooming magnolias. At the Massachusetts General Hospital, the day had already begun. Patients filled the waiting rooms, the smell of sanitizer clinging to every breath. Eli nodded to the nurses, fixed a flickering light in the hallway, and repaired a broken elevator button without being asked. Nobody clapped, but everyone smiled when he passed. Meanwhile, across town, Grace found herself pacing her living room. Her phone was still off. She couldn't bring herself to return to the company, not yet. The board could wait. She was tired of pretending she was fine. For years, she had lived inside deadlines and deals, but now, every ticking clock in her home reminded her that life was not supposed to sound like this. That afternoon, she picked up the blue jacket and folded it into a paper bag. She didn't know why, but her hands moved as if they already had a plan. When the rain eased, she called a cab. "Massachusetts General Hospital, please," she said. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You all right, ma'am?" Grace smiled faintly. "I'm just returning something." The hospital lobby smelled exactly as she remembered, sterile but alive. A strange comfort she hadn't expected. Nurses passed with clipboards. Volunteers poured coffee in paper cups, and the hum of life echoed down the corridors. She walked past the gift shop, the waiting area, and the window where raindrops traced lazy paths across the glass. When she reached the maintenance desk, the clerk looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," she said. "Eli Turner. Works the night shift." The clerk typed quickly. "He's off today. Should be back Monday night." Grace nodded, unsure what she had hoped for. "Could you please make sure he gets this?" She handed the paper bag across the counter. The clerk peeked inside and smiled. "Looks like something special." Grace hesitated, then said softly, "It is." She turned to leave, but stopped near the elevator bay, drawn by the sound of laughter. Down the hall, Eli was there unexpectedly, wearing the same blue jacket she thought she'd brought to return. He was helping an elderly man into a wheelchair, his movements gentle, his patience endless. When the patient muttered something about not wanting charity, Eli just chuckled. "It's not charity, sir," he said. "It's teamwork." Grace stood frozen, unseen. She wanted to step forward, to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. Watching him, she realized the truth. He didn't need recognition. He simply was. She left the hospital quietly, the paper bag still in her hands. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and persistent. Grace opened her umbrella and walked toward the river, her reflection trailing beside her. Like a ghost, she was slowly learning to forgive. Evening drifted slowly over Boston. The drizzle had turned into a thin mist, softening the edges of the skyline. Eli Turner locked the door of his small apartment, the scent of tomato soup still clinging to the kitchen. Inside, Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, coloring by the glow of a small lamp. "Daddy, what's this word?" she asked, pointing at a half-finished homework sheet. "Gratitude," he said, kneeling beside her. She scrunched her nose. "What does it mean?" Eli smiled. "It means saying thank you for something even when nobody's asking you to." She considered that, nodding with the solemn wisdom only a 7-year-old could manage. "Then I'm grateful for you," she said matter-of-factly, and returned to her drawing. Eli swallowed the lump in his throat. "Right back at you, kiddo." He watched her for a long moment, pencil scratching across paper. On the page, she was drawing the same thing again, a man holding an umbrella over a woman in the rain. He didn't ask why. Some stories, even children know how to tell without words. Later, after he'd tucked her into bed, he stepped out onto the fire escape. The night air was cool, the smell of wet brick rising from the alley below. He looked up at the faint glow of downtown lights and wondered how the woman from the accident was doing. Probably back in her high-rise world by now, far away from leaky faucets and night shifts. Still, part of him hoped she'd seen the morning like he promised. Across the city, Grace Monroe stood at the window of her penthouse, watching the same mist blur the skyline. The paper bag she'd carried to the hospital sat unopened on the table. She couldn't bring herself to part with it after all. The jacket was back on the armchair, draped loosely, as if waiting for someone to return. She made herself tea, a simple act she hadn't done in years. No assistants, no machines, just hot water, steam, and silence. As she sipped, the faint echo of the hospital corridor came back. Eli's calm voice, the nurse's laughter, the feeling of life continuing around her even when she'd been too cold to care. Her phone buzzed with another message from the office. She turned it face down again. Then, almost without thinking, she walked to the window and whispered, "You saved more than my life." The city didn't answer, but the reflection in the glass did, less polished, more human. Rain tapped lightly against the panes, and for the first time in years, Grace let herself listen. Each drop sounded like a heartbeat, steady and alive. Down by the river, church bells rang for the late-night mass, their echo carrying through the mist until it reached her window. She stood there until the sound faded, breathing in the quiet. Somewhere out there, the man in the blue jacket was probably listening too. And though neither of them knew it, that simple moment, the same rain, the same city, was already beginning to stitch their two lives together again. By late November, the city had traded rain for crisp air and gold leaves skittering along the sidewalks. Thanksgiving lights hung over Beacon Street, and every cafe window flickered with candles. Grace Monroe watched it all from the back seat of a taxi, her reflection ghosted against the city she'd once conquered. She hadn't attended a public event since the accident, but tonight would be different. Tonight, she would face the noise again. The Monroe Foundation Gala was the kind of evening where champagne flowed faster than sincerity. Inside the ballroom, everything gleamed: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and faces she had once known by their business cards. Photographers clustered near the entrance, waiting to catch a headline: "CEO returns after tragic crash." Grace smiled politely, the expression feeling like a borrowed mask. She had come not for the cameras, but for the cause. This year, the gala's proceeds would fund new medical equipment for Massachusetts General Hospital. Quietly, she'd arranged that the hospital staff, custodians, orderlies, night guards, receive special recognition. It was her way of saying thank you without saying it at all. Across town, Eli Turner adjusted his tie in the mirror of his apartment. He hated ties. They choked him in ways words never could. But Martha, the nurse from the night shift, had convinced him to attend the event as part of the hospital staff. "You're a hero, Eli," she'd said, wagging a finger at him. It wouldn't hurt to let people clap for once. Now, standing outside the glittering hotel ballroom, he felt entirely out of place. The other guests shimmered in designer suits and evening gowns. His jacket was pressed but old. His shoes shined with more effort than polish. He tugged at his cuff nervously, feeling Lily's small drawing folded in his pocket, his good luck charm. Inside, a string quartet played softly as the host spoke about generosity, innovation, and the power of giving back. Grace sat near the front, listening with half an ear. Her gaze wandered over the crowd until it froze there. Near the side entrance stood Eli. The lights caught his profile just long enough for her heart to stumble. He hadn't seen her. He was talking with a nurse, nodding, smiling, that quiet smile she remembered. Something in her chest ached, a strange mix of pride and shame. She had wanted to honor him anonymously, but seeing him there among strangers made her realize how fragile gratitude could be. When the speeches ended, people rose to mingle. Grace excused herself from a group of investors and moved toward the refreshment table. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up a glass. From the corner of her eye, she saw him again, closer now, scanning the room with quiet alertness, like someone used to watching rather than being seen. Their eyes met across the crowd. For a brief moment, the noise around them faded. There were no chandeliers, no music, no onlookers, just the echo of rain and a promise that had carried her through the darkest night of her life. Eli's gaze flickered in recognition. He gave a small nod, nothing more, and turned as a commotion erupted near the stage. A man in his 70s, one of the evening's donors, collapsed mid-speech. The microphone screeched, chairs scraped, panic rippled through the ballroom. Before anyone else moved, Eli was already there. He dropped to his knees beside the man, checked his pulse, loosened his collar. "Call 911!" he shouted, his voice cutting clean through the chaos. The musicians froze. Waiters dropped trays. The crowd gasped as Eli began chest compressions. Grace pushed through the ring of people until she stood near the front. The scene blurred the white shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, the practiced rhythm of his hands, the stillness of everyone watching. Then, slowly, the old man's chest rose. A nurse arrived with a defibrillator, and Eli guided her, calm as ever. When the paramedics rushed in minutes later, applause broke out. Not the polite kind given to a speech, but raw, grateful clapping that filled the hall. Eli stepped back, his expression unreadable. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. She realized then that this was who he was. No grand speeches, no spotlight needed, just quiet courage, again and again. As the applause faded, Eli's eyes met hers once more. No words, no gesture, just a faint nod before he disappeared into the crowd. The ballroom slowly emptied after the chaos. Crystal glasses clinked softly against forgotten tables. The string quartet had long stopped playing. Outside, sirens wailed faintly as the ambulance sped away. Grace remained where she was, still hearing the echo of Eli's voice, commanding calm through the panic. Someone touched her shoulder. Ben Carver, her longtime assistant, ever dutiful and slightly anxious. "The press will want a statement," he whispered. "Not tonight," she said, her voice steady but distant. "Let them talk about the man who actually saved someone." Ben frowned. "You mean the security guard?" She turned sharply. "His name is Eli Turner." Ben hesitated, caught off guard by the conviction in her tone. "Of course. I'll make sure that's in the report." He handed her a glass of water, then quietly left her alone under the fading chandelier light. For a while, Grace stood still, surrounded by the soft shuffle of hotel staff cleaning up. The scent of champagne lingered in the air, sweet but hollow. She looked down at her reflection on the polished marble floor, a woman once known for efficiency, now trembling at the thought of kindness. Through the tall windows, she saw Eli outside, speaking to paramedics, calm as always. Cameras flashed from the sidewalk, voices rising.
"Sir, over here! Smile for us!"
He didn't. He simply nodded to the paramedic and slipped quietly into the crowd. Grace followed a few steps toward the door, but stopped. Something inside told her he didn't want to be found tonight. When she finally stepped outside, the rain had started again, thin, silvery, falling over the city like forgiveness. She walked to the edge of the hotel canopy, watching the blur of lights reflected in the wet pavement. People hurried past, talking about the hero security guard who had saved a man's life in front of Boston's elite. Her breath clouded in the cool night air. She whispered almost to herself, "He saved another life. Again." No one heard, but it didn't matter. The words weren't meant for the world. They were meant for the man who never stayed long enough to take credit. Grace drew her coat tighter and crossed the street, her heels clicking against the pavement. The city lights shimmered in puddles, echoing that first night, the crash, the rain, the jacket draped over her shoulders. As she stepped into her car, she glanced at the hospital brochure on the seat beside her. Massachusetts General, serving Boston since 1811. She traced the words with her fingertip, then whispered, "Maybe it's time I start serving something too." The driver started the engine, and the car pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Grace caught one last glimpse of the hotel entrance, the same place where her world had broken once, and where, quietly, it had begun to mend again. Outside, the rain softened into mist, and the lights of Boston stretched across the river like 1,000 small prayers. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds of the Boston Medical Center, filtering across white walls and half-empty coffee cups. Eli Turner had been up since dawn, doing what he always did, checking the hallways, signing off on safety logs, fixing the stubborn lock on the pharmacy door. After the chaos of the gala, normal felt like mercy. But nothing stays normal for long. When he walked into the break room, the television was already on. A reporter's voice filled the air. Last night's Monroe Foundation Gala turned dramatic when a security guard saved a guest's life mid-event. Witnesses describe his calm actions as heroic. Sources identify him as Eli Turner, an employee of Boston Medical Center. The mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the tile. The nurses gasped, but Eli didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes, letting the noise wash over him. He'd spent years trying to disappear, and now, the whole city knew his name. Martha, his coworker and friend, hurried over. "Eli, they're saying you performed CPR in front of 300 people. You should be proud." He gave a weary smile. "Pride's a luxury I can't afford." "Come on," she said gently. "This is good press for the hospital. They want to do an interview." "No," he interrupted, sharper than intended. "Let them find someone else to put on the screen. I'm not that man." He walked out before she could respond. Across town, in her office overlooking the Charles River, Grace Monroe sat in front of her laptop, watching the same footage. The article headline blazed across every site. The hero guardian, man who saved Boston, Theo identified. Photo after photo showed Eli's sleeves rolled, steady hands, calm eyes. The media called it fate. She called it something else entirely. She had tried to honor him quietly. But now, the world had dragged him into the light. Her assistant, Ben, knocked softly. "We're flooded with calls from journalists. They want to joint interview you and Mr. Turner together." Grace closed the laptop. "Decline them all." "Are you sure? This could help our public image after—" "After what?" she said, voice low. "After a man risked his life and asked for nothing in return?" Ben hesitated. "Grace, he's different. The press doesn't understand that kind of silence." She looked out at the skyline. "Then let's not make him speak." But the world doesn't listen to silence. By afternoon, reporters camped outside the hospital, cameras ready. Eli slipped out through a side exit, pulling his jacket tighter against the November wind. Each question that followed him, "Are you the man who saved Grace Monroe?" sounded more like an accusation than praise. At the corner of Boylston Street, he stopped at a diner. The bell jingled as he entered, the smell of coffee and fried eggs wrapping around him like memory. Lily sat in the booth, legs swinging, drawing on a napkin. "Hey, champ," he said softly. "Daddy, I saw you on TV," she beamed. "You're a hero." He froze. Her innocence hit harder than any headline. "No, sweetheart," he murmured. "Heroes don't run from cameras." "But you saved people," she insisted. "That's what heroes do." Eli leaned across the table, lowering his voice. "Sometimes being a hero means knowing when not to talk about it." She frowned, unconvinced. "Miss Parker says when you do something good, you tell people so they can do it too." He smiled sadly. "Miss Parker sounds smart." Lily grinned. "She is. She has a cat named Jefferson." Eli laughed quietly, grateful for the innocence that could cut through all the noise. But deep down, he knew the truth. Once the world named you a hero, it never let you go. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Grace faced her own storm. The boardroom of Monroe Tech buzzed with talk of opportunity. "Grace, this could be a PR miracle," one executive said. "You survived a crash, and now your savior's a local hero. The public loves redemption arcs." Grace's expression hardened. "This isn't a movie." "It could be," another chimed in. "A press conference, a photo with him. Think of what it would do for our image before the holiday quarter." Her jaw tightened. "You talk about him like he's a product." A long silence followed. Then, softly but firmly, she said, "Cancel everything. No press, no photo ops. If you try to contact him, you'll answer to me." The room fell quiet. Outside the glass wall, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds, the kind that promised snow. Grace walked out, heels echoing against the marble. The world she once ruled now, feeling smaller, colder. She didn't know where Eli was, but she knew what she had to do next. The next morning, the hospital lobby buzzed louder than usual. Cameras flashed from outside the glass doors, and every nurse who walked by whispered the same two words, the hero. Eli Turner moved through the hallway with his head down, hands in his jacket pockets. His world, once simple and quiet, now felt too bright. He'd spent years blending into the rhythm of others' footsteps, and suddenly, the city wanted to march to his. At the far end of the corridor, he saw her. Grace Monroe, standing near the waiting area, a paper cup of coffee trembling slightly in her hand. She looked out of place in the gray light, no cameras, no entourage, just a woman trying to be brave in silence. When she saw him, she smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd still work mornings." He exhaled slowly, not angry, just tired. "You shouldn't be here. The press is still outside." "I don't care about the press," she said, stepping closer. "I came to apologize." "Oh, for what?" His tone was quiet but firm. "For surviving?" Her lips parted. She hadn't expected that. "For not protecting your privacy. I never meant for them to find you." Eli's gaze softened for a moment. "They were bound to. People like me don't stay invisible forever." "But you wanted to," she said. He looked past her, toward the children's ward where the walls were painted with clouds and balloons. When you lose something you can't replace, hiding starts to feel like peace. Grace's voice lowered. You're talking about your wife. He nodded once. Clara, 5 years ago. Accident on I-90. I was on duty overseas. I couldn't even come home in time. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. Grace wanted to say she understood, but she didn't. Instead, she said softly, "Then maybe saving me wasn't an accident." Eli let out a dry laugh. Don't start with fate. It's just reflex. Some people run toward fire, some away from it. I just never learned how to stop. Before she could answer, a small voice interrupted them. Daddy! Lily came running down the hall, her pink backpack bouncing. She stopped when she saw Grace, eyes wide. You're the lady from the TV. Grace knelt, smiling gently. I suppose I am. You almost died, Lily said matter-of-factly. But Daddy saved you. He's really good at saving people. Grace's smile faltered. Yes, he is. Eli stepped forward. Lily, honey, we should let Miss Monroe— Can she have my drawing? The girl asked, pulling a folded paper from her backpack. It's you, Daddy, giving her your jacket, so she won't be cold. Grace took the picture with trembling hands. Crayon lines, uneven and bright, showed a man in blue holding an umbrella over a woman with yellow hair. Beneath it, in careful letters, Don't be afraid of the rain. Something inside her broke, quietly and completely. She blinked away tears and whispered, Thank you, Lily. You're welcome, the girl said, skipping back toward the nurse's station. Eli watched her go, his expression unreadable. Grace folded the drawing carefully. She's beautiful, she murmured. She's my anchor, he said. The only reason I get up when it's still dark. Grace hesitated. Maybe that's what you are for other people, too. You pull them out of the dark, even when you don't mean to. He looked at her, then really looked, and something shifted. Not forgiveness yet, but understanding. I didn't save you for a story, he said finally. I did it because no one deserves to die alone, she nodded. And maybe no one deserves to live alone either. The words lingered between them, fragile as light through rain. Eli took a step back, the moment breaking. You should go before the cameras find you. They'll twist everything. Grace sighed, turning toward the exit. They already have. She paused at the door. If you ever need a reason to stop hiding, you know where to find me. He didn't answer, but long after she left, Eli stood by the window, watching the first snowflakes drift past the glass, quiet, fleeting, and impossibly gentle. He didn't know it yet, but the storm outside had finally started to clear. Snow blanketed Boston in soft silence, muting the usual hum of the city. The Charles River had frozen near the banks, and the world outside Grace Monroe's penthouse seemed carved from glass and memory. She hadn't slept much. The drawing from Lily lay open on her desk, beside a cooling mug of chamomile tea. The line beneath the crayon figures, "Don't be afraid of the rain," haunted her in ways she couldn't explain. She'd faced boardrooms filled with billion-dollar deals, but somehow, those uneven letters carried more truth than any speech she'd ever given. She had promised herself she wouldn't pry into Eli's life again. But promises built on guilt rarely hold. That afternoon, she called Dr. Warren, an old friend from the hospital board, under the pretense of understanding more about their staff. Eli Turner? He repeated, his voice cautious. Yes, I know him. Former Army medic. Joined us 5 years ago. Quiet man. Does his work, no fuss. Grace hesitated. Former Army? Afghanistan, Warren said. He left after his wife died. Car accident. Left behind a daughter. Sweet kid. He never really came back from that. She felt the words land like stones. Does he ever talk about it? Not once, Warren replied gently. Some people carry their wars differently, Grace. Some keep fighting them long after they're home. After the call ended, she sat there for a long time, the city lights blurring outside her window. She had built her empire on control, but tonight she felt powerless, not because she pitied him, but because she understood that kind of silence, the kind that builds walls so high, even kindness can't climb them. She turned on her desk lamp and opened her laptop. The Foundation's private archive blinked on screen. Her cursor hovered over a file marked Hospital Security Records, San Rafael Branch. She didn't need to open it, but she did anyway. There he was, Eli Turner, age 38. Former combat medic. Honorable discharge. Awards for bravery and humanitarian service. Beneath that, a scanned note in his own handwriting. I'm not here to be thanked. I just don't want anyone to die alone again. Grace's breath caught. The same words he'd told her. Suddenly, she saw him differently, not as a savior, but as a man still haunted by who he couldn't save. Outside, the wind howled against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, church bells marked midnight. She closed the laptop slowly, whispering into the empty room. You've been saving people to forgive yourself. Meanwhile, across town, Eli sat on his apartment floor, surrounded by unopened mail. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, the glow from the Christmas tree flickering over her face. He reached into his wallet and pulled out an old photo Clara, smiling under the Arizona sun, holding Lily as a baby. He hadn't looked at it in months, maybe years. The pain never faded, but it dulled like a scar that aches in the cold. A knock startled him. 3 sharp taps against the door. He frowned, stood, and opened it. Grace Monroe stood there, wrapped in a gray coat dusted with snow. I'm sorry for coming so late, she said quietly. But I couldn't sleep. Eli's guard went up instantly. How did you even find this place? I didn't. Your daughter drew it. She held up the picture. She said you lived near the old church. It wasn't hard. And, he sighed, you shouldn't be here, Grace. People will talk. Let them, she said simply. I'm not here as Grace Monroe, CEO. I'm here as someone who owes you more than she can ever repay. He stepped aside reluctantly. Then you'd better come in before you freeze. Grace stepped inside. The apartment was modest, clean but worn. A stack of storybooks leaned against a chipped coffee table. A framed photo of Lily sat beside a mug that read, World's Oakiest Dad. The smell of cocoa and old wood filled the air. Eli motioned to the sofa. You can sit, if you don't mind clutter. It's not exactly a penthouse. Grace smiled faintly. It's warmer than mine. He poured her tea from the kettle on the stove. Mint's all I've got. Perfect, she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. For a moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly, the only sound between them. Finally, Grace broke the silence. I read your record. Em? Eli's hand froze halfway to the table. You what? I needed to understand. Her voice was gentle, almost pleading. You've been saving people your whole life, even when it hurts. Why? He looked away, his jaw tightening. Because one time, I couldn't. Grace set her cup down. Your wife? He nodded. Clara. She was driving home from visiting her sister. Rain came out of nowhere. I was overseas, patching up strangers while the one person who needed me the most died alone on a highway. His voice cracked, soft but raw. So when I saw you trapped in that car, I couldn't let it happen again. Grace's eyes stung. She whispered, You don't need to save everyone to be forgiven. Eli gave a faint, tired smile. Maybe not, but it's the only way I know how to live. From the couch, Lily stirred, mumbling in her sleep. Grace looked at the little girl, the soft curls, the crayon smudge on her cheek, and felt something shift deep inside her. For years, her life had been made of numbers and deadlines. But in that small apartment, forgiveness looked a lot like warmth. Eli stood, rubbing his neck. You didn't come here just to tell me that. Grace hesitated. You're right. I wanted to offer you something, a position with my foundation. We're launching a new program for medical response training. It's called the Turner Initiative. He frowned. You're naming it after me? After what you stand for? She corrected softly. Courage that asks for nothing. He shook his head. Grace, I don't want a legacy. I just want to raise my kid and go to work. Then do that, she said. But let others learn from what you already know. Let this your story help someone else find theirs. He looked at her for a long moment, uncertain whether to trust her. Then, slowly, he exhaled. You never give up, do you? Not anymore. Grace rose to leave. At the door, she paused and turned back. The light from the street lamp cast soft gold over the room, making the air shimmer between them. For what it's worth, you didn't just save me that night. You reminded me what it means to feel alive. Eli's voice was quiet. And you reminded me what it means to stop hiding. She smiled, Small, real, unguarded. Then she pulled the door open, letting the snow swirl in. "Good night, Eli." He watched her disappear down the steps, her figure fading into the falling snow. When he closed the door, the apartment felt different, not emptier, but lighter. He glanced at Lily's drawing on the fridge. The man, the woman, the umbrella. A crayon sun peeked through the rain clouds. For the first time in years, Eli Turner believed that maybe, just maybe, the rain could stop. Winter thawed slowly that year. By late February, the city's edges began to soften, snow melting into narrow streams that raced along the curbs, sunlight catching on the glass towers of downtown Boston. Inside, the modest training center recently opened under the Monroe Foundation. A banner hung crookedly near the entrance. The Turner Initiative. First aid for every heart. Eli still blushed every time he walked past it. He had agreed to lead the program only after Grace insisted, then insisted again, and finally showed up at his door with Lily, who handed him a folder and said, "Please help my dad help more people." He hadn't stood a chance. Now, as he stood in front of a group of volunteers, firefighters, nurses, retirees, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose that didn't ache. "All right," he said, gesturing toward a training dummy on the table. "CPR is about rhythm, not strength. Think steady, not forceful. You're not fighting the body, you're reminding it how to live." A few people chuckled. From the back of the room, Grace smiled. She'd kept her distance all week, letting Eli lead. She wasn't there as the CEO today. She was there to watch him do what he was born to do. During the break, she joined him near the coffee table. "You know, you're a natural teacher," she said. Eli poured himself a cup. "I'm just passing on what I learned the hard way." "Still," she said softly, "there's something healing about hearing you talk like that." He looked up, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. "Healing? Yes. You talk about saving lives, but what you're really teaching is how to stay human." He didn't know how to respond, so he just sipped his coffee. "And you?" he asked finally. "Why are you here every day, Grace? Don't you have a company to run?" She smiled. Maybe this is what running a company should have felt like. They stood quietly for a moment, the hum of conversation filling the space between them. There was no tension now, just a fragile kind of ease that neither wanted to break. That afternoon, as the class ended, Lily burst through the doors, still in her school uniform. "Daddy," she called, racing toward him. "Guess what? Miss Parker says I can bring a guest for Family Day, and I told her I'd bring both of you." Eli blinked. "Both of us?" "Uh-huh," she said proudly. "You and Miss Grace." Grace laughed, a sound that warmed the entire room. "I'd be honored, Lily." Eli rubbed the back of his neck, trying to hide a smile. "We'll see, kiddo. Let's not plan everyone's day yet." But as Lily chattered about her school play, Grace caught Eli's gaze and saw something unspoken, an invisible bridge forming between their worlds, built not from grand gestures, but from small, steady moments like this. Later that evening, after the last volunteer had left, Grace lingered near the window. The city outside was drenched in orange light, the sun sinking behind the skyline. Eli locked up the supply cabinet and walked over, holding his coat. "You should get home," he said. "Lily will be hungry." She nodded, watching a flock of birds scatter across the sunset. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He followed her gaze. "Next? After all this," she said. "After saving, teaching, repairing, what happens when you finally forgive yourself?" He exhaled, thoughtful. "Then I start learning to live again." She turned to him, her expression soft. "I think you already are." He smiled faintly. "And you, Grace? What happens when the woman who fixes everyone else decides to fix herself?" Her eyes glistened in the fading light. Maybe she stops running from the rain. For a heartbeat, the air between them felt suspended, like the city itself was holding its breath. Then Grace stepped back, breaking the moment with a gentle laugh. "See you tomorrow, Eli." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Tomorrow." "Oh." As she walked away, the last of the sunlight glinted off the glass, casting a bridge of gold between them. The following Saturday dawned clear and bright, one of those rare March mornings when winter finally loosens its grip and the air smells faintly of thawing earth. Lily had been awake since 6, too excited to eat her breakfast. "Daddy, hurry, we'll be late," she said, tying her sneakers backwards in a rush. Eli laughed softly. We have an hour, kiddo. Family day doesn't start until 9. But Miss Parker said the good seats go fast. He shook his head and helped her fix her shoelaces. All right then, let's go claim our front row throne. At the door, Lily looked up. Miss Grace is coming too, right? Eli hesitated. She said she might stop by. She promised, Lily said, her voice full of certainty only children carry. At that same moment across the river, Grace Monroe stood in front of her closet, holding a coat she hadn't worn since before the accident, a simple beige one, the kind that didn't demand attention. She took a deep breath, buttoned it, and told her reflection, It's just a school event, not a board meeting. When she arrived at the small elementary school, the gym buzzed with chatter and the smell of popcorn. Paper banners hung from the ceiling, Family Day, Love Builds Bridges. Grace paused at the doorway, uncertain. She didn't belong among finger paints and folding chairs. But then she saw them. Eli kneeling beside Lily, helping her tape her poster to the wall. The sight melted the distance between them. Lily spotted her first. Miss Grace! She ran across the gym, her ponytail bouncing. Grace bent down and caught her in a hug, surprised by how natural it felt. You came, Lily said breathlessly. I told Daddy you wouldn't miss it. Grace smiled. And you were right. Eli walked over, wiping his hands on a napkin. Morning, he said softly, almost shy. Morning, she echoed. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, he said. She's been saving you a seat. They sat side by side on the bleachers as the children began their presentations, drawings of families, stick figures holding hands, houses under rainbows. When Lily's turn came, she carried her poster to the front with the kind of confidence only a 7-year-old could have. This is my family, she announced proudly, pointing to 3 figures drawn in crayon. A man with a blue jacket, a woman with yellow hair, and a little girl in between holding both their hands. My daddy saves people, and Miss Grace makes people smile again. The audience chuckled, charmed. But for Eli and Grace, the world seemed to stop. Eli blinked hard, his throat tight. Grace's eyes glistened, her hand unconsciously clutching the edge of the bench. The picture was simple, clumsy, but it said what words never could. After the applause faded, Lily ran back to them. Did you like it? Eli crouched down, his voice rough. More than you'll ever know. Grace knelt beside them. It's beautiful, Lily. You've got a big heart. Lily grinned. That's 'cause Daddy says hearts don't get smaller when you share them. Eli gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Did I really say that? You did, she said proudly, hugging both of them at once. For the briefest moment, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years, a belonging that wasn't tied to power or success, but to warmth, to home. As the event ended, they walked outside into the pale sunshine. Children were running in the playground, their laughter ringing like bells. Grace turned to Eli. You know, she might be right. About what? About us being family, she said softly. Not by blood, by choice. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Then I'd say she has good taste. They both laughed, the sound light and easy. For the first time, it didn't feel like 2 worlds colliding. It felt like one bridge, finally complete. As they stood there, Lily's small hand slipped into each of theirs, linking them together under the late morning Sunday. And though no one said the word love, it hung quietly in the air, something real, fragile, and growing. The first morning of spring came soft and golden over Boston. Dew glistened on the windows of the new Turner Initiative Center, where a small crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Eli adjusted his tie awkwardly. He still wasn't used to formal days. Beside him, Lily twirled in her new yellow dress, while Grace smiled at them both. Big day, she said gently. For you, Eli replied. Your foundation built this. Grace shook her head. No, we built it. You gave it a heart. As the ceremony began, a local news anchor introduced the program. Then, to everyone's surprise, Lily stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was small but steady. My dad says helping one person can change the world. So that's what I want to do too. Applause filled the courtyard. Eli blinked hard, pretending the wind had gotten in his eyes. Grace reached for his hand just for a moment and smiled. Later, as the crowd dispersed, she turned to him. You know, she said, I've decided to step down as CEO. Eli looked at her. startled. "You serious?" "I want to spend the rest of my life doing, not managing," she said. "This center, it feels like a beginning." He nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure it's a good one." They stood side by side, the sound of laughter and new beginnings drifting through the spring air. That evening, the city was wrapped in soft sunset light. Eli, Grace, and Lily walked along the Charles River, their shadows stretching long against the water. Ellie spoke quietly. "You know, last night I dreamed of Clara." She wasn't crying this time. She was smiling. Grace smiled too. "Maybe she's finally telling you it's okay to move on." "Maybe," he said. "And you? Do you ever think about the night of the crash?" "All the time," she admitted. "But now, when I do, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like the start of something right." Lily ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the dusk. On the wall of the center nearby, a mural glowed in the orange light, 3 figures sharing an umbrella beneath the words, "No one should stand alone in the rain." Grace looked at it, tears soft in her eyes. "It's finally over," she whispered. Eli smiled gently. "No, Grace. It's finally beginning." As the first evening stars appeared, they walked forward together hand in hand, with Lily leaving behind the shadows of the past and stepping quietly into the light of a new tomorrow. Sometimes, the quietest mornings carry the deepest echoes of the past. As Boston wakes beneath a soft spring light, Eli, Grace, and little Lily walk hand in hand, 3 souls once lost in their own storms, now finding warmth beneath the same Sunday. The Turner Initiative hums behind them, a living testament that even broken lives can build something whole. And somewhere in the gentle breeze, forgiveness breathes, not loud, not grand, just steady, like the heartbeat of a second chance. This story reminds us that redemption doesn't always arrive with thunder or applause. Sometimes it comes in small acts, a hand offered, a truth spoken, a home rebuilt out of quiet care. Love doesn't erase the past, but it teaches us how to walk beside it without fear. Like a porch light glowing through the night, unconditional kindness has the power to guide us safely home no matter how long we've been wandering. Love, forgiveness, and the courage to rebuild can heal even the deepest wounds. Every soul deserves warmth, a place to belong, and someone who believes they are worth saving. Because in the end, happiness doesn't come from wealth or success. It comes from sharing the simple goodness of being human. And maybe, just maybe, that's what family really means. Not the people we're born to, but the ones who walk beside us when the rain finally stops. As you sit with your coffee tonight, or recall an old photograph by the window, think of this. Even the smallest act of care, a phone call, a meal, a kind word, can become someone's shelter in the storm. If this story touched your heart, press 1 in the comments to let me know. If you think it could be told better, press 0 and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. And if it made you feel even a little less alone tonight, well, that's all the story ever hoped to do.